Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just talked about Dan Hurley and the potential of him joining the Los Angeles Lakers as they continue to search for their next head coach. And I wanted to sort of turn that into a broader conversation of the college basketball atmosphere. I know it is the offseason and it's not on the top of everyone's minds right now, but last week there was the deadline for NBA prospects to decide whether or not they wanted to stay in the draft and forego their college eligibility or come back for another year. And Bronny James, who let's face it, as much as he is one of the most interesting prospects in the league just because of his name, he was not the most high impact player in college basketball last season, and he likely wasn't going to be for this upcoming season either. So that took away a lot of the headlines, but there were some really substantial moves that I want to dive into here, starting with, as we just talked about, UConn and Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley leaving would be the biggest move from player to coach, period, if he were to not return to UConn, especially considering they do seem to have a legitimate chance to three-peat if he stays. They are going to be ranked in the top 5 or 10, I would guess, as things currently stand headed into next season, part of which because of the fact that Alex Caravan, their forward from last season, who averaged 13 points per game, I feel like he would have been drafted if he didn't pull his name out of the draft, that he's now going to get a chance with this UConn program in a much bigger role, where he very well may be the Huskies' leading scorer next season. But it's him, Solomon Ball, Hassan Diarra, Samson Johnson, Jalen Stewart. 5 of their top 9 scorers for whatever that means, obviously, as you go down the list there. Yeah, you're not getting quite as much production, but players that have been in the system for a year or two and are familiar with Dan Hurley. Dan Hurley is familiar with them, and they could absolutely make some moves. Added to the fact that they brought in Aiden Mahaney, who was a nice pickup in the transfer portal. He played the past 2 seasons at St. Mary's, was all WCC both of those years. So he is somebody who could sort of take a step up in terms of playing in a power conference now for the first time in his career. He could make a little bit more noise, is somebody who's really interesting there. And the Huskies also got another 5-star recruit, sort of similar to the way that they played last season when you look at the transition, where they bring in a 5-star prospect, this time in Liam McNeely. Last year, of course, it was Stephon Castle. And McNeely, it's going to be interesting. I would guess, at least for a freshman season, that he would probably play a little bit more of a supplemental role. With McNeely, the first thing that stands out is the 3-point shooting with him. That is going to translate to the next level in my eyes, and he's going to be an absolute sharpshooter. But how much is he going to be involved on the ball is something that I'm definitely going to be curious to see. But all in all, this is a very talented roster with, as long as Hurley stays, debatably the best active head coach in the game. So obviously, watching what Hurley does from here on out is going to be a massive question. But some other top players who decided to stay in college basketball after testing the NBA waters a little bit. Mark Sears of Alabama, the short, high-scoring guard for Bama the past couple seasons, who last year was the runner-up, I believe, for SEC Player of the Year, averaged 21.5 points per game, was a massive piece of the Alabama Crimson Tide, making it as far as they did in the NCAA tournament, All-SEC, All-American. We know how talented he is on the offensive side of the ball, and he's going to be another heavy hitter for Bama this upcoming season as they, continue this on, where there were a lot of conversations about, how Bama could, I wouldn't say implode necessarily after this run, but there were rumors that Nate Oates could possibly move on, go to that Kentucky job that was extremely tempting for them. If they lost Mark Sears, their number one option, their head coach, things could look very differently, but instead they're running it back to some degree, and that is definitely a massive add for Alabama in terms of that decision. Another big name is Jackson Robinson. For those of you who might not have watched all too much BYU, he was the conference sixth man of the year. Not only is he coming back into college basketball, he is following his head coach from last year in Mark Pope to Kentucky. So again, Big 12 sixth man of the year last season. I think he's going to be a top 3 scorer for Kentucky this upcoming year, I would imagine, in the starting lineup. This is going to be a very transfer-heavy roster, obviously, for Kentucky, considering the fact that they went through this massive uphauling of a coaching situation. But they have a number of, notable players. If you are sort of in tune with college basketball, Amari Williams, Lamont Butler, Otega Owe, Kobe Brea, Brandon Garrison, all of these different names that have a ton of starter experience. They'll have some guys coming off of the bench as well. Krisa, Carr, and Brea, all, 10-point per game scorers. And it's going to be really interesting to see. Obviously, Mark Pope, he is sort of going a little bit short-sighted, I would say, to some degree. A lot of experience in the transfers that they went out and got. But ultimately, they're going to be competitive this season. And it's going to be a whole nother conversation for how can Pope do in terms of building up a recruiting class over the next handful of years. John Calipari, of course, was one of the best recruiters in college basketball for a number of years there. He has, attracted some players to Arkansas, which, as we bring up Arkansas here, he brought DJ Wagner with him, who is somebody that I do still think has a lot of promise for NBA potential. He was the number 6 ranked player in his class coming into his freshman year. Obviously was a disappointing season, but could be somebody who emerges this year too. He has all the physical tools, I would say, to be able to make that jump moving forward. But along with that, they bring in John L. Davis, who played at Florida Atlantic, was, had that Final Four experience a couple years ago. And Arkansas is definitely going to be interesting. I believe they just brought in Jonas Adu as well, the big man from Tennessee. I know he was a little bit on the fence, so I'm not sure if that is officially official just yet, but definitely some big moves there going on at Arkansas, where they are going to be another team in Calipari's first year that is maybe a little bit I think that they are probably looking a little bit more so to the future than Kentucky is in year one of both of these coaches in new places, but both should be competitive rosters. Caleb Love as well, going back to Arizona, which is a big add for the Wildcats, who have sort of been knocking on the door of being one of these elite college basketball teams, and we've seen the regular season success. It just hasn't necessarily translated to the NCAA tournament just yet, but Caleb Love, definitely a big add in that sense. But let me know what your favorite, transactions were throughout the course of the college basketball offseason. We have quite some time until we officially get into the year, but considering how much movement takes place, it's never a bad thing to sort of look ahead a little bit, so that when it comes to, October or whenever the season tips off, that, it's not playing a little bit of a who's who game across every single roster in a Power 5 conference. But again, let me know your favorite transactions. We're going to be taking our final break, though, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be talking about the NFL and the proposal around the 18-game schedule and some of the backlash that idea has faced up to this point. So stick with us, and we will be right back.